Go back where you came from. The words hung in the crisp autumn air, sharp and ugly like shards of glass. They were directed at a boy of 17, whose hands were held slightly away from his body, palms open. He was standing on a public sidewalk in the city of Northgate, holding a vintage film camera. The man who spoke was a police officer, hand resting on the butt of his holstered pistol, his face a mask of casual contempt. Across the street, a woman paused her jogging. A man watering his newly laid sod slowed his movements. A curtain twitched in a second-story window, and on a nearby park bench, a young woman's smartphone was raised, its small black lens and unblinking eye. The boy, Leo, did not flinch. He simply stood there, his breathing even, his gaze fixed on the officer's badge. That was the first thing his father had taught him. Look at the badge, not the eyes. The badge has a number. The eyes just have hate. The officer Miller took a step closer, crowding the boy's space. He enjoyed this part, the flicker of fear he expected to see. But it wasn't there. Just a strange, unnerving calm. The sound of another car approaching, a nondescript sedan, broke the tension. It pulled to the curb with quiet authority. A man stepped out. He was tall, mid-50s, with the kind of stillness that comes from immense discipline. He wore a simple gray coat over a dark suit. He looked at his son, then at the officer. What Officer Miller didn't know, what no one on that street knew, was that the boy's father, Marcus Thorne, had spent the last 30 years of his life dismantling systems of injustice, first as a JAG officer in the Marines, then as a federal prosecutor for the Civil Rights Division, and that in exactly 21 days, he would be sworn in as Northgate's new police commissioner. This officer had just picked a fight with the one man who could unmake him. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The day had begun with light, the specific quality of early October light that filtered through the large bay windows of their new house, pale and golden. It fell across the polished hardwood floors and illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. Marcus Thorne stood at the kitchen counter, grinding coffee beans by hand. The rhythmic crunch was a form of meditation. It was a ritual he'd maintained through deployments, through long nights preparing for trial, through the chaos of moving his family across the country for this new chapter. 21 days of leave remaining. He counted them not with anxiety, but with purpose. 21 days to settle his family, to learn the rhythms of this new city before he stepped into the storm. His wife, Sarah, entered the kitchen, wrapping her arms around him from behind. She was a landscape architect, her hands always smelling faintly of soil and mineral. She rested her chin on his shoulder. "Morning, Commissioner," she murmured into his shirt. He smiled, the title still feeling foreign. "Not yet. For 21 more days, I'm just a guy on vacation." "A guy on vacation who reads policy briefs for fun," she countered, her voice warm. She was his anchor, the family anchor. She cooked meals, held his hand, said few words when many weren't needed, and represented the quiet, beautiful world he was fighting to protect. Their life was a carefully constructed haven of normalcy and love. It was the foundation upon which he built everything else. He poured the hot water over the grounds, the rich aroma blooming in the kitchen. Simple, grounding. He and Sarah had learned a long time ago that the world's chaos could be held at bay by the deliberate practice of small, peaceful things. Making coffee, tending a garden, reading a book aloud. These were not escapes. They were acts of resilience. Their son, Leo, came downstairs a few minutes later, the old Pentax K1000 camera slung around his neck. He had his grandfather's eyes and Sarah's quiet intensity. "Morning," he said, grabbing an apple from the bowl on the counter. "Heading out. I want to catch the light on those old brownstones in the Ainsworth district." Marcus nodded. "Be aware of your surroundings." It was the same thing he said every time Leo went out. Not a warning born of fear, but a reminder of a shared reality. It meant, be present, be smart, be safe. "Always," Leo replied. He had a passion for urban architecture, for the way buildings told the story of a city's past. He saw beauty in decaying facades and ornate ironwork. It was a perspective Marcus admired, a way of seeing the world that was both artistic and analytical. Marcus watched him leave, a familiar mix of pride and a low, humming vigilance filling his chest. He had raised his son to be confident, observant, and kind. He had taught him his rights, taught him how to de-escalate, how to comply physically while asserting himself verbally. He had given him all the tools to navigate a world that would not always see the bright, talented young man he was, but a threat to be managed. He had prepared him for a moment he hoped would never come. He let himself feel the quiet worry for exactly 3 seconds. Then he released it. He had work to do. He turned back to his coffee, the morning light still streaming in, peaceful and undisturbed. The quiet before the storm. Leo felt the city breathe. He walked east, away from the manicured lawns of their new suburban neighborhood, and toward the historic heart of Northgate. The air changed. It smelled of brick dust, diesel fumes, and roasting nuts from a street vendor's cart. This was what he loved, the friction of history against the present. The Ainsworth district was a tapestry of neglect and renewal. Grand 5-story brownstones with intricate cornices stood shoulder to shoulder with boarded-up storefronts and newly opened cafes selling $5 lattes. He lifted the Pentax, its solid mechanical weight a comfort in his hands. He wasn't just taking pictures of buildings, he was documenting ghosts. The ghost of a thriving black middle class that had built this neighborhood a century ago. The ghost of the prosperity that fled in the 60s. The ghost of the community now being pushed out by rising rents and developers who saw the area's character as a commodity. He framed a shot of a wrought iron gate, its elegant scrollwork rusted but intact. The late morning sun cast long shadows, highlighting the texture of the pitted metal. He adjusted the aperture, the satisfying click of the ring a small private joy. He was so focused on the interplay of light and shadow that he didn't notice the police cruiser until it slowed to a crawl beside him. He felt a prickle on his neck, the way a deer feels the wolf before it sees it. He lowered his camera slowly, deliberately, keeping his hands where they could be seen. The cruiser stopped. The window whirred down. Inside sat Officer Miller. Miller's eyes weren't on Leo's face. They were on the camera, on his clothes, a simple dark hoodie and jeans, on his skin. "What are you doing here?" The question wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "Taking photographs," Leo said. His voice was steady. He'd practiced this with his father. State facts calmly. Do not offer more than is asked. Miller's eyes narrowed. He was a man comfortable in his power, a mid-career officer who had worked the same district for a decade. His behavioral signature was well known in the neighborhood, though Leo did not know it yet. Performative authority, a loud voice to play for an audience, an inability to see the humanity in anyone who didn't look like him. "Taking pictures of what?" Miller asked, his tone laced with disbelief. "The architecture," Leo said, gesturing with his head toward the brownstone. "That gate specifically. The ironwork is original to the 1890s. The officer's lips curled into a faint smirk. It was a micro-expression of contempt, a flicker of disgust that Leo felt like a physical blow. Miller saw a story he had already written in his head. A kid from the projects, probably casing houses, using the camera as a prop. "You don't look like you're from around here," Miller said, letting the sentence hang in the air. He was opening the car door now, the practiced, heavy movement of a man who used his body as a tool of intimidation. Leo stood his ground, his heart rate climbing, but his posture unchanged. He knew this was a test. Any sign of fear or anger would be used as justification for what was to come. "We just moved to Northgate," Leo said. "I live on the west side. Sycamore Drive." This was a mistake. He knew it as soon as he said it. He had given away a piece of information, a detail that contradicted the officer's prejudice. And prejudice hates contradiction. Miller's smirk vanished, replaced by a cold blankness. Sycamore Drive was where the money was, where the judges and the doctors and the tech executives lived. This kid didn't fit. The cognitive dissonance angered him. "Don't lie to me, son," Miller said, his voice dropping. He was out of the car now, his hand resting on his holster. It wasn't a conscious threat. It was a habit, a posture. "I asked what you were doing in this neighborhood." "I told you," Leo said, his own voice remaining level. "I'm a photographer." "Let me see your ID." Leo didn't move. "Am I being detained, officer?" His father's voice in his head, calm and precise. "Ask the question. Make him say it. Make him commit." The question hung in the air. Miller's jaw tightened. The kid was a talker, knew the words. He hated that. It complicated the simple script. "You're being suspicious," Miller snapped. "Prowling. Casing properties. That's probable cause. Now give me your ID. I'm standing on a public sidewalk in broad daylight, Leo stated, not as an argument, but as a fact. My father is a lawyer. He told me to ask if I am being detained or if I am free to go. The mention of a lawyer was a spark on dry tinder. Miller's face flushed a deep mottled red. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger. Something colder. It was the fury of a man whose petty authority was being questioned by someone he considered beneath him. He saw the boy not as a citizen with rights, but as an object of his will. You're detained, Miller snarled, stepping forward and grabbing Leo's arm. The grip was hard, bruising. You want to play lawyer? Fine. We'll sort this out at the station. He reached for Leo's camera, and I'll be taking this as evidence. It was then, as Miller's hand closed on the body of the Pentax, that Leo felt the first surge of real hot anger. The camera had been his grandfather's. It was a piece of his family, a piece of his history. But he held it in. He let his body go limp, complying physically. He let Miller twist his arm behind his back. He felt the cold click of the handcuffs. Around him, the street was a silent theater. The jogger had stopped. The man with the hose was frozen. The curtain in the window was still. And on the park bench, the small black lens of a smartphone was still recording. It was then that Officer Miller leaned in close to Leo's ear, his voice a low, venomous hiss, meant only for him. Should have stayed on your side of town. Better yet, go back where you came from. The click of the handcuffs was a sound that broke the world into two pieces, the before and the after. Leo felt the cold metal bite into his wrists. He focused on the pressure, on the rough hands pushing him toward the patrol car. He didn't resist. His father's training was a mantra in his mind. Survive the encounter. The fight comes later. Officer Miller shoved him against the side of the car, the metal hot from the sun. The search was rough, invasive. A performance for the silent audience on the street. Miller pulled out Leo's wallet, flipping through it with a sneer. He saw the new address on Sycamore Drive. The name, Leo Thorne. It meant nothing to him. Just a piece of data that didn't fit his narrative. He tossed the wallet onto the passenger seat. Get in, he commanded. The back of the patrol car smelled of stale sweat, cheap air freshener, and something bitter, like fear. Leo sat on the hard plastic, his shoulders pressed against the door. He watched as Miller spoke into his radio, his voice a clipped official monotone that bore no resemblance to the venom he'd just spit into Leo's ear. Have a juvenile male in custody. Suspicion of prowling. White male, approximately 5 feet 10 inches, a dark hoodie. No, wait. A pause. A glance into the rearview mirror. Subject is black. Repeat. Subject is black. The correction was delivered with a casualness that was more chilling than any slur. It was the sound of the machine correcting a data point. Nothing more. While Miller was on the radio, Leo's phone, which had been in his pocket, buzzed. Miller had missed it in his perfunctory search. It was his one call. He'd set his father's number to a speed dial that could be activated with a sequence of volume button presses. A paranoid precaution his father had insisted on. A tool he never thought he'd need. He maneuvered his cuffed hands, pressing the sequence. The phone dialed silently. In his quiet home office miles away, Marcus Thorne was reviewing a dense report on departmental budget allocations. His phone buzzed. It was Leo. He answered, expecting a question about what was for dinner. Leo, everything okay? Silence. Then, the muffled sound of a radio squawk and a man's voice, Miller's voice, heading back to the precinct for processing. Marcus went still. The blood in his veins turned to ice water. He didn't speak. He listened. He heard the rumble of the car, the sigh of the worn suspension. He heard his son's steady, controlled breathing. He was alive. He was calm. That was everything. Marcus stood up. His movements were slow and deliberate. He took his keys from the bowl by the door. He put on his gray coat. He walked out to his car, the phone still pressed to his ear. He didn't need anyone to tell him what had happened. He had spent a career listening to the sounds of the machine at work. He knew its every gear, its every grinding cog. As he drove, he listened to the silence from the back of the patrol car, a silence that spoke volumes. It spoke of his son's discipline. It spoke of his humiliation. And it spoke of a promise Marcus had made to himself long ago, that if the machine had ever came for his family, he would not just break it, he would dismantle it, piece by piece, and ensure it could never be rebuilt in the same way again. He arrived on the scene just as another patrol car was pulling up, likely the backup Miller had unnecessarily called for. The street was still quiet, but now the silence was heavy, charged. He saw Leo in the back of the first car. He saw Officer Miller standing with the newly arrived officer, laughing about something. Marcus got out of his sedan. He closed the door with a soft, final click. He walked toward them, his long coat moving around him. He felt the weight of dozens of eyes. The neighbors, the other officers, the young woman on the bench who was now trying to look like she wasn't still filming. Miller turned as Marcus approached, his hand once again going to his holster. A nervous tick. A tell. "Sir, you need to stay back. This is an active scene." "That's my son," Marcus said. His voice was quiet, devoid of emotion. It was the voice he used in depositions, the voice that unnerved witnesses and opposing counsel alike. It carried no heat, only weight. Miller looked from Marcus to Leo and back again. The expensive coat, the calm demeanor, the quiet authority. Another piece that didn't fit his puzzle. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, but was quickly replaced by belligerence. "Your son was prowling private property. He's being detained for investigation." "My son was taking a photograph of a gate," Marcus stated, his eyes locking on Miller's badge. "Number 714. He was on a public sidewalk. You have no probable cause for a detention." Officer Miller puffed out his chest. He was used to shouting, to escalating. He was not used to this cold, precise calm. It felt like being cross-examined. "I have all the cause I need. Now, I'm going to ask you to leave, sir, or you'll be arrested for obstruction." Marcus didn't move. He simply looked at Miller. He could have ended it right there. "One sentence. I am the incoming police commissioner." The words were on the tip of his tongue. He could have watched the blood drain from Miller's face, watched his career flash before his eyes. But that would have been too easy. That would have been about personal vengeance. This wasn't about him. This was about the boy in the car. It was about all the other boys and girls who didn't have a father who was the incoming commissioner. Justice for Leo had to be justice for all of them. So he held the words back. He stored them away, a weapon to be used at the right time. Not now. Instead, he said something else. A simple, quiet sentence. "I see. Please ensure he is processed at the downtown precinct. I will meet you there." He turned and walked back to his car without another word. The retreat was strategic. He had the officer's badge number. He had a recording of the arrest. He had a street full of witnesses. And he had 21 days. Officer Miller watched him go, a confused sense of victory warring with a creeping unease. He had won the confrontation. He had put the father in his place. But as Marcus Thorne's sedan pulled away, Miller couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't won anything at all. He felt like a man who had just stepped on a trigger and was now listening to the faint, terrifying click of a mechanism he could not see, counting down to a detonation he couldn't begin to imagine. The ride home from the precinct was silent. The charges had been dropped the moment Marcus had shown his credentials, not as commissioner, but as a member of the bar, to the desk sergeant. A quiet, tense exchange had taken place away from the main floor. The sergeant, a man with tired eyes who understood the landscape of liability, had recognized the folly of charging the son of a prominent attorney with prowling for taking a picture. Leo had been released with a dismissive apology and a warning to be more careful. They were hollow words. The damage was done. In the car, Marcus drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He glanced at his son. Leo sat staring out the passenger window, his face a stony mask. The camera, his grandfather's camera, sat on the seat between them. Its lens was cracked. A thin spiderweb of fractures radiated from a single impact point, likely from when Miller had tossed it onto the front seat of the patrol car. That cracked lens was more eloquent than any words. It was a symbol of the casual, thoughtless violence of the encounter. It was the kind of detail that lodges in the heart and festers. When they arrived home, Sarah was waiting at the door. She didn't ask questions. She simply opened her arms and enveloped Leo in a hug. She held him for a long time, her hand stroking the back of his head. He was stiff at first, then he sagged against her, the rigid control he'd maintained for hours finally cracking. Marcus watched them, his own controlled fury of physical presence in the room. He felt it the way a furnace feels a fire, a contained infernal heat. He had learned a long time ago that righteous anger was a powerful fuel, but a terrible master. It had to be channeled. It had to be disciplined. Sarah led Leo to the kitchen table. She placed a glass of water in front of him. She sat with him, her presence a silent, unwavering testament of love and safety. She was the anchor, holding them all steady in the storm. Marcus went to his office and closed the door. He allowed himself exactly 5 minutes. 5 minutes to feel the undiluted rage of a father whose child had been harmed. He closed his eyes and let it wash over him. The humiliation of his son, the arrogance of the officer, the casual cruelty of the words, "Go back where you came from his own home, from his own country. He felt the phantom pain of the handcuffs on his own wrists, a pain inherited through generations. He felt the fury of every black parent who has had to give the talk, who has had to arm their child with strategies for survival instead of dreams of adventure. He let himself feel it all, the heat of it, the sheer crushing weight of it, for exactly 300 seconds. Then he opened his eyes. The rage was still there, but it was no longer a flood. It was a forge. It was focused. It was cold. He sat down at his desk and turned on his laptop. The first email he read was the official incident report, forwarded to him by the precinct sergeant as a courtesy. He read Officer Miller's words. Subject was observed acting suspiciously in a high-crime area, casing residences. Subject became belligerent and uncooperative when questioned. Subject was detained for officer safety and further investigation. It was a work of fiction, a carefully constructed narrative designed to justify every action, to preempt any complaint. It was the machine protecting its own. That was the moment the fight truly began. Not on the street, not in the precinct, but here, in the quiet of his office, reading the official lie. That wasn't just a false report. That was an assault on the nature of reality itself. Marcus Thorne stood up and walked to a bookshelf. He pulled down a calendar. He circled today's date. Then he counted forward. 21 days. 21 days until he was no longer just a father, but the head of the entire Northgate Police Department. He drew a red X through the first day. 20 days of leave remaining. The countdown had begun. His first call was not to the mayor or the city council. It was to a number he hadn't dialed in years. An old friend from his days at the Department of Justice. A man who now ran the public integrity section. The second thing he did was pull up a satellite map of the Ainsworth district. He traced the route Leo had walked. He studied the street where the incident had occurred. He would walk it himself tomorrow. He needed to feel the ground, to see the light, to understand the space where his son's dignity had been assaulted. The third thing he did was open a new encrypted file on his computer. He labeled it Project 714 for Officer Miller's badge number. Inside, he created a single document. At the top, he wrote a quote from memory, a line from an old law professor he admired. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Beneath it, he wrote, but it doesn't bend on its own. The next morning, Marcus woke before dawn. The house was still and dark. He dressed not in a suit, but in a simple pair of jeans, a gray sweatshirt, and worn-in boots. He was not a prosecutor or a future commissioner today. He was an investigator. He made coffee in the quiet kitchen, the ritual grounding him. He left a note for Sarah and Leo, then slipped out of the house. The drive to the Ainsworth district was different in the pre-dawn gloom. The city was still asleep, its streets empty and washed in the sodium glow of streetlights. He parked his car several blocks away from the site of the incident and began to walk. He needed to approach it on foot, at the same pace Leo had. He needed to see what his son had seen. The light quality was changing, a thin, watery gray beginning to dilute the darkness. He saw the neighborhood wake up. A bakery truck making a delivery, its engine rumbling. A woman in scrubs walking briskly toward a bus stop. A man sweeping the sidewalk in front of a small grocery. These were the rhythms of the community. He arrived at the street. He saw the brownstone, the ornate iron gate. In the soft morning light, he could see the beauty that had captured his son's imagination. The elegant, decaying grandeur. It was a place of history, of stories. He stood on the exact spot where Leo had stood. He felt the cold of the pavement through the soles of his boots. He looked around. He saw the jogging path in the park across the street. He saw the house, with the freshly laid sod. He saw the second-story window where a curtain had twitched. Witnesses, all of them. He stayed there for nearly an hour, just watching the flow of traffic, the people coming and going. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He was absorbing the atmosphere, embedding the scene in his memory. His destination was a place he'd found on a map the night before, a place mentioned in some of the community forums he'd read. Henderson's barbershop. It was 3 blocks away, a small, unassuming storefront with a classic red, white, and blue striped pole out front. The windows were dark, but a faint light shone from within. He waited until the clock on a nearby church tower struck 8. Then he walked up and tried the door. It was open. The smell inside was of talc, coffee, and old newspapers. It was a warm, welcoming scent. An older man sat in one of the barber chairs, reading a paper and sipping from a thick ceramic mug. He was tall and lean, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and eyes that held a deep, knowing calm. This was Alistair Henderson, the elder, a pillar of this community for 50 years. Mr. Henderson looked up as Marcus entered, his eyes taking in the stranger's face, his clothes, his posture. He didn't smile, but he didn't frown. He simply observed. "A little early for a cut," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. "I'm not here for a cut," Marcus said. "I'm here to listen." He walked further into the shop. The walls were covered in photographs, pictures of neighborhood kids who'd gone off to college, of local sports teams from decades past, of community leaders and ordinary families. It was a living museum of the Ainsworth district. Henderson folded his newspaper and placed it on the counter. He took a slow sip of his coffee. He had seen men like Marcus before, men with a fire in their eyes, a wrong they wanted to right. Most of them burned out. The machine was designed to exhaust them. "Listen to what?" Henderson asked. "About Officer Miller," Marcus said. The name dropped into the quiet room like a stone in a steel pond. Henderson's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. He had been waiting for this. Not for Marcus specifically, but for someone. For the right moment. "Badge number 714, Henderson said. Not as a question, but a confirmation. "Been terrorizing this neighborhood for the better part of a decade. What's he done now?" "He arrested my son yesterday for taking a picture." "Your son," Henderson said, his gaze unwavering. "He was the young man with the camera? We heard." "Word travels fast." Marcus nodded. "I need to understand what we're up against. I've read the official reports. I need the unofficial ones." Henderson was silent for a long moment. He studied Marcus's face, searching for something. For the anger, yes, but for something more. For patience, for resolve. He had seen too many people come in hot and fade away when they realized the fight was a marathon, not a sprint. Finally, he seemed to find what he was looking for. He nodded slowly. "Finish your coffee," he said, gesturing to the pot on a small side table. "Then we'll talk." After Marcus had a mug of the strong black coffee in his hands, Henderson led him to the back of the shop. He unlocked a door to a small, cluttered office. Against one wall was a metal filing cabinet. It was old and gray, dented in places, but it was locked with a heavy-duty padlock. Henderson produced a key from his pocket and opened it. Inside were not files, but a series of thick, ledger-style notebooks. Dozens of them, stacked neatly. The box of evidence. "For 30 years, Henderson began, his voice low, "I've been keeping a record. Every time someone comes in here with a story about a bad stop, about harassment, about an officer crossing the line, I write it down." He pulled out one of the notebooks and opened it on his desk. The pages were filled with a neat, precise cursive. Each entry was dated. It listed the person's name, the officer's name if they knew it, the location, and a detailed account of what had happened. "I started after my own brother was beaten by 2 officers in 1993. They said he resisted arrest. Broke his jaw. The complaint went nowhere. So I started writing things down. I told people, the official report is their story. This book is ours." He flipped through the pages. Most people are too scared to file a formal complaint. They know it'll just get them targeted again, or they file one and it disappears into a black hole, but they'll talk to me. They trust me. He stopped on a page. He ran his finger down a list of entries. "Miller David, badge 714. The name appeared again and again, year after year. Dozens of entries, illegal searches, false arrests, racist language, excessive force. Each one a small story of humiliation and injustice. Each one a thread in a larger tapestry of abuse. We call him the gatekeeper, Henderson said. He makes sure certain people know they aren't welcome in this part of town. Marcus looked at the notebooks, at the decades of pain and patience captured in their pages. This wasn't just a collection of anecdotes. This was a shadow archive, a meticulously documented history of systemic failure. This was the foundation of the case. Has anyone ever tried to use this? Marcus asked. A few years back, a young lawyer from the ACLU got wind of it, Henderson said with a sigh. Full of fire. He was going to build a class action. He took copies of 10 years' worth of notebooks. 2 weeks later, his tires were slashed. A week after that, he was arrested for a DUI he swore he didn't commit. Charges were dropped, but his firm transferred him to another state. He sent the notebooks back. The message was clear. The machine protects itself. This time will be different, Marcus said. It wasn't a boast. It was a statement of fact. Henderson looked at him, a flicker of something new in his eyes. Not hope. Hope was a luxury. This was something harder, more durable. It was recognition. Why? He asked simply. What makes you different? Marcus met his gaze. He still wasn't ready to reveal his position. That was his ace, to be played at the proper moment. Because, Marcus said, the men who sent that message are about to find out that I speak their language better than they do. That afternoon, Marcus sat in a quiet corner of a coffee shop on the other side of town, far from both his home and the Ainsworth district. On the table in front of him were a laptop and a burner phone he'd purchased that morning. The first phase of his plan was complete. He had the ground truth from Mr. Henderson. Now he needed the corroborating evidence. His phone rang. It was an unknown number. He answered. Is this Mr. Thorne? A young woman's voice asked, hesitant. This is he. My name is Maya. Maya Ramirez. I was at the park yesterday when they arrested your son. The witness. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude for her courage. It was one thing to film an incident. It was another to follow up, to risk getting involved. Miss Ramirez, he said, his voice calm and reassuring, thank you for calling me. I can only imagine that was not an easy thing to witness. It wasn't right, she said, her voice gaining a bit of strength. The way he talked to him, the way he grabbed him. I filmed it, on my phone. You did, Marcus confirmed. I saw you. You were on the bench near the water fountain. A pause on her end. You saw me? I see everything, Marcus said, his tone gentle. It's part of my job. He was intentionally vague. I don't know what to do with the video, she confessed. My friend said I should post it online, make it go viral. But I'm scared. That officer, I don't want him coming after me. Do not post it, Marcus said, his voice firm but kind. That is exactly what they would expect. A burst of public anger, a news cycle or two, and then it fades. The officer gets a slap on the wrist, maybe desk duty for a month. Nothing changes. The machine just absorbs the shock and keeps running. He let that sink in. He was asking for something much harder than viral outrage. He was asking for trust. What you have, Miss Ramirez, is not a social media post. It is a piece of evidence, a crucial one. And evidence is most powerful when it is deployed with precision, at the right time, in the right venue. What do you want me to do? She asked. I want you to email a copy of the video to an address I'm about to give you. It's an encrypted account. Then I want you to hold on to the original. Keep it safe. Don't show it to anyone. Can you do that for me? Can you trust that I am handling this in a way that will lead to real, lasting consequences? He heard her take a deep breath. Yes, she said. Yes, I can do that. Thank you, Maya, Marcus said, using her first name to build a connection. You've done a brave thing, a very important thing. After he hung up, he sat for a moment. Henderson's notebooks were the history. Maya's video was the present. He now had the narrative. Next, he needed to understand the system that enabled it. He opened his laptop and began drafting an email to his contact at the Department of Justice, the professional ally. His name was Ben Carter, a sharp, relentless prosecutor who specialized in pattern or practice investigations into police departments. They had come up together, two of the few black men in their division, and had forged a bond built on shared purpose and mutual respect. Ben, he wrote, hope you're well. I'm calling in a chip. I'm in Northgate. I have what I believe to be credible, multi-decade evidence of a pattern of civil rights violations and official misconduct originating from the city's police department, specifically within the Ainsworth district. It's systemic, and it appears to be actively protected by mid-level command. He paused, then added, there's a personal component to this I'll explain when we speak. I'm not officially on the job for another 19 days, so this is off the books for now. I need your eyes on it. Let me know when you have a secure line available. He hit send. He knew Ben would respond within hours. While he waited, the system pushed back. An official email arrived in his personal inbox, the one registered with the city. It was from a Sergeant Davies, the head of patrol for the Ainsworth district, Miller's direct supervisor. Mr. Thorne, the email read, I am writing in regard to the informal complaint you lodged yesterday concerning the detention of your son, Leo Thorne. I have reviewed Officer Miller's report and spoken with him directly. While the situation is regrettable, Officer Miller acted within the bounds of departmental policy regarding the investigation of suspicious activity. We consider this matter closed. Sincerely, Sergeant R. Davies. It was a masterclass in bureaucratic dismissal. Polite, professional, final. It was a door slamming shut. Marcus read the email twice. He felt no anger, no frustration. This was exactly what he expected. It was the machine doing what it was designed to do. Protect its parts, reject foreign objects like complaints and accountability. This email wasn't a setback. It was another piece of evidence. The cover-up. The mid-level protector in the antagonist hierarchy. He forwarded the email to the encrypted account where Maya had sent the video. He then forwarded it to his own burner email, adding it to Project 714. He created a new subfolder, Davies R. The phone on the table buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Secure line active. Call now. B.C. Marcus packed his laptop, left the coffee shop, and walked to his car. He sat in the driver's seat, the engine off, and dialed the number. Ben, he said. Marcus, what's going on? You sound cold? I am cold, Marcus replied. I've got a fire to put out, and I need you to bring the water. He spent the next 30 minutes laying it all out. Leo, Officer Miller, badge 714, the cracked camera lens, the false report, the decades of notebooks in Henderson's barbershop, the video from the girl in the park, the dismissive email from Sergeant Davies. He laid out the facts with the dispassionate precision of a prosecutor presenting his opening statement. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Marcus, Ben Carter said finally, his voice tight with controlled anger. They have no idea who they just messed with, do they? No, Marcus said. They don't. And I need to keep it that way, for now. What do you need from me? Ben asked. I need you to open a preliminary inquiry, quietly. I'll feed you everything I get. Henderson's records, the video, the personnel files I'm going to get my hands on. I want you to build a federal civil rights case so strong, so airtight, that when it drops, it shatters the whole rotten structure. Consider it done, Ben said. But Marcus, you know what this means. You're not just taking on a cop, you're taking on his supervisor, the department, the union, maybe even City Hall. This gets ugly. I know, Marcus said, looking out at the quiet suburban street. I'm counting on it. He hung up the phone. 18 days of leave remaining. The pieces were moving. The quiet, methodical counterattack had begun. For the next week, Marcus operated in the shadows of his own future authority. By day, he was a father on leave, helping Sarah unpack the last of the moving boxes, having long, quiet dinners with Leo, who was slowly returning to himself. He even bought Leo a new camera, a beautiful Leica M6, a classic mechanical body similar to the destroyed Pentax. It was a gesture that said, they cannot take this from you. By night, he was a ghost in the machine, using the preliminary login credentials the city had provided him, meant for reviewing budgets and organizational charts. He began to explore the digital corridors of the Northgate Police Department. He was careful, using encrypted connections and backdoors he'd learned to identify during his time in military intelligence. He wasn't hacking the system. he was using the key they had given him to walk into rooms they didn't expect him to enter. He started with Officer David Miller, badge 714. His file was both damning and predictable. 17 years on the force, over 30 civilian complaints for harassment, excessive force, racial profiling. Every single one of them had been marked unfounded or exonerated, usually after a perfunctory internal review conducted by his direct supervisor, Sergeant R. Davies. A pattern. Marcus cross-referenced the dates and names from Miller's file with the entries in the digitized copies of Henderson's notebooks that the old man had allowed him to make. They matched up perfectly. The official record was a whitewash. The unofficial record was the truth. He then pulled the file for Sergeant Davies, a 25-year veteran, a man who had come up in the same district he now supervised. He was the gatekeeper's gatekeeper. Davies had personally cleared Miller in every single one of his 30-plus complaints. He had also authored numerous commendations for Miller, praising his proactive policing and instincts on the street. It was a closed loop, a perfect system for protecting bad cops and punishing the communities they policed. Marcus felt a cold satisfaction. This was the architecture of the machine. He was mapping it, understanding its load-bearing walls, its weak points. He was drawing the blueprint for its demolition, but he knew he was still on the outside. He had the what. He needed the how and the why. How did Davies manage to bury so many complaints? Why was Miller so untouchable? That kind of protection often involved more than just a friendly supervisor. It spoke to a deeper rot. The answer came from a place he didn't expect. An email to his official, soon-to-be active commissioner account. The subject line was blank. The sender was an internal police department address, but the name was one he didn't recognize. Detective Ava Rostova. The email itself contained a single sentence. I have the files you're looking for. The insider. The one he'd hoped for but never counted on. Someone within the corrupt institution who had been waiting for the right moment, the right person, to come forward. Marcus knew this was a critical and dangerous juncture. A direct reply could be monitored. He had to establish a secure channel. He used a public record search to find Rostova's home address. He didn't go there. Instead, he looked at a map. A public library was 3 blocks from her house. The next evening, Marcus went to that library. He sat at a public computer terminal and sent an email from a new anonymous account. To Detective Rostova, I will be at the main branch of the public library, 3rd floor, history section. Tomorrow at 8 p.m. Come alone. The next night, the air in the library was warm and smelled of old paper and binding glue. The 3rd floor was mostly deserted. Marcus sat at a table in an aisle dedicated to local history. A large book on Northgate's industrial past open in front of him. At 8:02 p.m., a woman appeared at the end of the aisle. She was in her late 40s, with sharp features and tired, intelligent eyes. She wore civilian clothes, but she moved with the coiled alertness of a career cop. This was Eva Rostova. She approached his table without a word and sat down opposite him. She placed a plain manila envelope on the table between them. Commissioner Thorne, she said, her voice a low whisper. I've been waiting for you. You know who I am? Marcus stated. I run background checks for internal affairs, she said with a humorless smile. It's what I do. I knew who you were the day your appointment was announced. I read your record at the DOJ. I knew you were either going to be part of the problem or the solution. And what have you decided? Marcus asked, his eyes on the envelope. You're here, she said simply. That's a start. She pushed the envelope a few inches toward him. For 5 years, I have been the complaint taker at IA, the person they send citizens to when they want to create the illusion that something is being done. I take the statements, I file the reports, and then I watch them die in Sergeant Davies' office. Why? Marcus asked. Why does he protect Miller? It's not just Miller, Rostova said, leaning forward. Her voice was barely audible. It's a crew, about a dozen of them, all loyal to Davies. They run the Ainsworth district like a personal fiefdom. They have a deal with some of the local developers. The developers want to flip the neighborhood, but they need the undesirables out. Miller and his crew engage in a campaign of targeted harassment. Bad stops, phony arrests, constant pressure. They make life miserable for the legacy residents, the renters, the poor. People get tired, they move, the developers buy up the property cheap. The machine wasn't just a metaphor, it was a business. And what does Davies get out of it? Marcus asked. Kickbacks, Rostova said, the word tasting like poison in her mouth. Off the books cash from the developers. He spreads it around to his crew to keep them loyal and quiet. Miller is his top earner, the most aggressive. That's why he's untouchable. She tapped the envelope. I've suspected it for years, but I could never prove it. IA is a boys' club, and Davies is one of the most powerful sergeants in the department. No one would back my play. So I did what Mr. Henderson does at the barbershop. I made my own records. Inside the envelope were copies of the original complaints against Miller and his crew, but Rostova had done something more. For each complaint that Davies had marked unfounded, she had attached her own suppressed follow-up investigation, notes from interviews he'd ordered her not to conduct, photos he'd told her to delete, statements from other officers who were too afraid to go on the record but would talk to her in confidence. It was a mirror of Henderson's notebooks, but from inside the system. It was the proof of the cover-up, the active, willful obstruction of justice. Why are you giving this to me now? Marcus asked, his mind already processing the implications, fitting this final, devastating piece into the puzzle. Because I heard what he did to your son, she said, her voice laced with a cold fury. And because I know you have the power to do what I never could. Burn it all down. Marcus looked at the envelope, then at the fierce, desperate hope in Detective Rostova's eyes. He had the history from Henderson. He had the event from Maya. He had the federal oversight from Ben Carter. And now he had the insider proof of the conspiracy. He had everything. All the pieces were on the board. 10 days of leave remaining. It was time to stop planning the counterattack. It was time to launch it. The plan was a symphony of precision. Marcus, Ben Carter, and Eva Rostova formed a silent triumvirate, communicating through encrypted channels, weaving their disparate threads of evidence into an unbreakable cable. Ben, from his office in Washington, D.C., began drafting the federal indictments. He used Henderson's notebooks to establish the historical pattern or practice of civil rights abuses, a crucial element for a DOJ case. He used Maya's video as the visceral, undeniable centerpiece of the complaint against Officer Miller, the actor's reuse in plain sight, and he used Rostova's suppressed IYA files as the evidence of the conspiracy, the proof of a criminal enterprise operating under the color of law, implicating not just Miller, but Sergeant Davies as the ringleader. Meanwhile, Rostova worked from within. She identified the other officers in Davies' crew. She quietly flagged their financial records for the federal investigators, pointing them toward the shell corporations the developers used for the kickbacks. She was a ghost in their system, marking them for demolition. Marcus was the conductor. He coordinated everything from his quiet home office. His role was to ensure the takedown was not just a federal action, but a moment of institutional reckoning for the Northgate PD itself. He spent hours on the phone with Ben, planning the logistics of the arrests. They would be carried out by federal agents, not local police, to avoid any possibility of leaks or interference. They would happen at the precinct, at the start of Miller and Davies' shift, for maximum impact. A public unmaking. In the midst of this intense clandestine work, Marcus maintained the facade of his leave. He took Leo to a driving range. They hit buckets of balls in a companionable silence, the rhythmic thwack of the club a strange therapeutic percussion. Leo was quieter than he used to be, more watchful. The wound was still there, but it was scarring over into something harder. Dad, Leo said, pausing before his swing. That officer, what's going to happen to him? Marcus stopped his own swing and looked at his son. He's going to be held accountable, Marcus said. You have my word. Just him? Leo asked, his eyes searching his father's. It was a profound question. Was this just about one bad cop? No, Marcus said. Not just him. The system that created him. The system that protected him. That's the real target. Leo nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He turned back to his ball and hit a perfect drive, straight and long down the middle of the fairway. In the final days before the operation, Marcus met with Mr. Henderson one last time at the barbershop. The morning light streamed through the front window, illuminating the history on the walls. It's time, Marcus told him. Henderson nodded. He'd been waiting 50 years for someone to say that to him and mean it. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to be ready," Marcus said. "When this breaks, this neighborhood is going to be the center of the story. People will be angry. They will be hurt. They will also, I hope, feel a sense of vindication. They will need a voice, a leader. That's you." Marcus then laid out the second part of his plan, the part that came after the arrests. He spoke of a civilian oversight board with real subpoena power and an independent budget. He spoke of rewriting the department's use of force policy. He spoke of a new recruitment program focused on hiring officers from the communities they serve. This wasn't just about punishment. This was about reconstruction. He looked at the older man. "I want you to be the first chairman of that oversight board, Alistair." Henderson was silent for a long time. He looked around his shop at the faces in the photographs, the ghosts of 1,000 stories, 1,000 injustices. He felt the weight of their collective memory. He looked at Marcus, this quiet, disciplined man who was about to unleash a hurricane. "All right, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's give them something new to remember." The night before the arrest, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with Sarah. The house was quiet. Leah was asleep upstairs. The files were sent. The warrants were signed. The federal agents were in place. There was nothing left to do but wait for the dawn. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked, her hand covering his on the table. "I've been ready my whole life," he said. It was true. His entire career, every case he'd prosecuted, every battle he'd fought, had been training for this. This was not just a professional operation. It was the culmination of a life's purpose. He was about to use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. "I'm proud of you," she said. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of their shared life, their shared values. They were the only commendation he needed. He squeezed her hand. "Try to get some sleep," she said, but he knew he wouldn't. He would sit in the quiet darkness and wait for the sun to rise. He had one day of leave remaining. Tomorrow, he would go to work. The morning of the reckoning was gray and overcast, the sky a flat metallic sheet. It was a day for endings. Marcus dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, a crisp white shirt, and a somber blue tie. He looked in the mirror. He was no longer a father on leave. He was the commissioner. He drove not to his new office at City Hall, but to a staging area a few miles from the Ainsworth precinct. It was a nondescript warehouse parking lot. Ben Carter was there, along with a dozen federal agents in vests marked FBI. They were grim-faced, all business. Ben handed Marcus a vest. "You don't need to be here for this, Marcus," Ben said. "This is our part." "I do," Marcus said, putting on the vest over his suit. "I need to see it. They need to see me." They drove in a silent convoy to the precinct. They parked a block away and approached on foot. The timing was precise. 7:58 a.m., 2 minutes before the shift change. Miller and Davies would be in the locker room or the briefing room, unprepared. Marcus and Ben stood on the sidewalk across the street while the federal teams entered the building through the front and back entrances. There was no shouting, no sirens, just a quiet, swift, and total occupation of the space. A few minutes passed, the silence stretched. Then it happened. The front doors of the precinct opened. 2 federal agents emerged, flanking Officer David Miller. He was in his uniform, but his hands were cuffed behind his back. His face was a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. His eyes darted around, looking for a friendly face, for a supervisor, for anyone who could explain this impossible reality. His gaze swept across the street and locked with Marcus Thorne's. In that instant, he knew. The blood drained from his face. He saw, not the quiet man in the gray coat from the street, but a figure of immense, terrifying power. He saw the father of the boy he had brutalized, and he understood, in a sudden, sickening flash, the catastrophic scale of his miscalculation. He had not just arrested a boy, he had arrested the future. A moment later, Sergeant Davis was brought out. He was a big man, but he seemed to have shrunk. The performative authority was gone, replaced by the slack-jawed fear of a man whose protections had evaporated. He looked bewildered, like a king whose castle walls had turned to dust. The irony was so thick it was almost poetic. They were being led out in handcuffs, just as they had done to countless others. They were being subjected to the same public humiliation they had so casually inflicted. Marcus watched, his face impassive. He felt no joy, no satisfaction, just a cold, quiet sense of order being restored. This was not vengeance, this was a consequence. This was the machine of justice, slow and methodical, finally closing its jaws. The media, tipped off by the DOJ press office, began to arrive. Cameras swarmed as Miller and Davies were placed in the back of black government sedans. The story was no longer a secret. It was a public spectacle. With the scene secured, Marcus walked across their street and entered the precinct. He walked through the bullpen where officers stood in stunned, silent groups. He was an alien presence, a new gravity warping the known universe of their world. He walked directly to the office that had belonged to Sergeant Davies. Detective Rostova was standing inside, waiting for him. "It's done," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's begun," he corrected her gently. He turned to the stunned precinct captain who had just arrived. "My name is Marcus Thorne," he said, his voice calm and clear, carrying across the silent room. "As of 8 a.m. this morning, I am the commissioner of the Northgate Police Department. This precinct is now under my direct command. I am initiating a full-scale audit of this district's operations, effective immediately. All officers involved in Sergeant Davis's crew are on administrative leave, pending federal investigation. Detective Rostova is now the acting supervisor of this precinct. Her first order of business will be to reopen every single civilian complaint that has been closed by Sergeant Davies in the last 10 years. He let his words hang in the air. It was a declaration of a new era, a promise and a threat. He turned to leave, his work here just beginning. As he walked out, he passed the evidence room. He paused. He looked at the rows of neatly tagged bags and boxes. In one of them, he knew, was a camera with a cracked lens, a small piece of a much larger story. He walked out of the precinct into the gray morning light. He had a press conference to give, a city to reassure, a department to rebuild. The countdown was over. The work had begun. The press conference was held on the steps of City Hall. The mayor stood beside Marcus, looking pale and shaken. The city council members stood behind them, a portrait of anxiety. Marcus stepped to the podium. He did not read from a prepared statement. He spoke directly, his voice steady and strong, carrying over the clicks of the cameras and the shouted questions of the reporters. He laid out the facts. The arrest of Officer Miller and Sergeant Davies. The federal investigation into a criminal conspiracy and a pattern of civil rights abuses. He did not mention his son. He did not make it personal. He made it systemic. "This is not a story about a few bad apples," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "When the barrel itself is rotten, the apples will inevitably spoil. My administration will not be focused on polishing apples. We will be in the business of building a new barrel." He announced the immediate suspension of the other officers in Davis's crew. He announced the formation of the Citizen Oversight Board with its own independent investigative authority and named Alistair Henderson as its first chair. He announced a complete overhaul of the department's use of force and search and seizure policies. He described the machine without calling it a machine. He described how it was designed to protect itself, to alienate communities, to foster a culture of impunity, and he promised to dismantle it. To the citizens of Northgate, and especially to the residents of the Ainsworth district, he said, his voice resonating with deep moral conviction, "I say this, your faith has been broken. Trust is not given, it is earned. And we will begin the long, hard work of earning it back today. Accountability will not be a buzzword. It will be our guiding principle." When he finished, there was a moment of stunned silence before the reporters erupted in a cacophony of questions. He answered a few with crisp, precise answers. Then he turned from the podium. His public work for the day was done. The rest would be behind the scenes. In the weeks that followed, the city of Northgate was in turmoil. The police union protested, calling the arrest a political witch hunt. But their bluster was hollow. The evidence Ben Carter and the DOJ presented in the initial hearings was overwhelming. Henderson's notebooks, Maya's video, Rostova's internal files. It was an avalanche. The developers who had paid the kickbacks were indicted. A city councilman who had helped facilitate the deals was forced to resign in disgrace. The systemic enabler had been exposed. The machine was being pulled apart, gear by gear. Detective Rostova, as acting supervisor, began the painstaking process of reopening old wounds. She and her team worked out of the Ainsworth precinct, which Marcus had designated as the pilot precinct for his reforms. They called the people from Henderson's notebooks. Many were hesitant at first, conditioned by years of disbelief, but Henderson was there, and Rostova was there, and slowly they began to talk, to give official statements, to have their stories entered into the record, not as complaints, but as evidence. Marcus spent his days in endless meetings, fighting bureaucratic inertia, union lawyers, and the deeply ingrained culture of the old guard, but he had the mayor's backing, and more importantly, he had the moral authority of the moment. Change was happening. It was slow, grinding work, but it was real. One evening, a month after the arrest, Marcus came home late. The house was quiet. He found Leo in the living room, sketching in a notebook. The new Leica camera was on the table beside him. "Hey," Marcus said, loosening his tie. "Hey, Dad." Leo looked up from his drawing. "I saw Mr. Henderson on the news tonight. He was talking about the oversight board." "He's doing good work," Marcus said. "He's a good man." There was a comfortable silence between them, the silence of a shared, unspoken understanding. "I went back there today," Leo said quietly. "To Ainsworth." Marcus felt a familiar pang of paternal anxiety, but he pushed it down. "Oh yeah? How was it?" "It was different," Leo said, trying to find the words. "The air felt lighter. People were out, talking to each other on their front steps. I saw a cop, a new one I think, get out of his car just to say hello to some kids playing basketball. He didn't have his hand on his gun." Leo looked at his father. "I took some pictures," he said. "Good ones." He didn't need to say anything more. Marcus understood. The fear was receding. The space was becoming his again. It was becoming the community's again. Justice wasn't just about the arrest and the trials. It was about this. It was about a boy being able to stand on a street corner with a camera and feel safe. It was about the air feeling lighter. Weeks turned into months. The federal trial concluded. Miller, Davies, and several other officers were convicted on racketeering and civil rights charges. They were sentenced to significant prison time. The developers received fines and probation. The system had worked, but Marcus knew the victory was incomplete. Jailing individuals was only the first step. The real work was in rebuilding the institution they had corrupted. The Citizen Oversight Board, under Alistair Henderson's stern and steady leadership, became a powerful force in the city. They reviewed every complaint, audited internal investigations, and had a seat at the table in hiring and promotion decisions. For the first time, the police department was accountable not just to itself, but to the people it served. Marcus's new use of force policy, which emphasized de-escalation above all else, was adopted and became a model for other cities. His community recruitment program began to bear fruit, with the first class of new officers including several young men and women from the Ainsworth district itself. The change was not seamless. There was resistance, but it was happening. One Saturday morning, almost a year after that first day in Northgate, Marcus found himself with a rare, unscheduled morning. Sarah was at a client site, and Leo was out with friends. The house was quiet. On an impulse, he got in his car and drove. He didn't have a destination in mind, but his hands on the wheel seemed to know where to go. He found himself in the Ainsworth district. He parked and began to walk. The neighborhood was vibrant. The new cafes and the old brownstones no longer seemed at war with each other. There was a sense of shared space. He saw new community gardens in formerly vacant lots. He saw murals painted on the sides of buildings, depicting the neighborhood's long history. He walked past Henderson's barber shop. The pole was spinning. Inside it was full. He saw Henderson busy with a client, catch his eye in the mirror. The old man gave a slow, deliberate nod. A nod of respect. A nod that said, "Look what we did." Marcus nodded back and kept walking. He walked the same route he had walked that morning nearly a year ago, the morning after Leo's arrest. He walked until he stood on the exact spot where his son had been handcuffed. He stood there for a long time. The sun was bright, the air warm. A young couple pushed a stroller past him. A group of teenagers walked by, laughing, their music playing softly from a phone. No one gave him a second glance. He was just a man standing on a sidewalk. He looked at the iron gate that had started it all. Its rusted beauty seemed different now. Not a symbol of decay, but of endurance. It had outlasted the corruption. It was still standing. He thought about the cracked lens of his father-in-law's camera. He thought about the decades of pain stored in Henderson's notebooks. He thought about the quiet courage of Maya Ramirez and Ava Rostova. Justice was never the work of one man. It was the convergence of many, a chorus of voices rising together. He felt a sense of peace settle over him. Not the peace of a finished job, but the peace of a right beginning. The fight was never truly over. The machine, or some new version of it, would always be there, waiting to be built. But now, there were more architects of justice, more watchers on the walls. He took a deep breath of the clear morning air. Just the road and the engine and the morning air. He turned and began the slow walk back to his car. He had a family to get home to, a garden to tend, a life to live. The quiet, beautiful world he had fought for and would always fight for was waiting. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.